In this video, I'm going to share with you an amazing project idea that's going to help you learn AWS. It covers the most important services that you need to know about and will help you build practical skills that you can carry with you throughout your cloud journey. Now, I'm a firm believer that the best way to build your AWS skills is through a hands-on project. I've used this method on my own journey and found that the process really helped solidify my understanding of core AWS concepts. On top of that, it helped me build confidence to solve real-world problems that look similar to what you might find while working as a cloud engineer. Getting this hands-on experience helped me become a better developer and grow much faster in my career, and I'm sure that it'll do the same for you. Now you might say to yourself, but what about certifications? AWS markets the heck out of these as a great option to initially learn AWS. Now, in my opinion, they're one way to get started, but not the best way. The issue is that certifications tend to focus too much on details that don't necessarily translate into the skills you use on the job. This is where a hands-on project will really help. Now, keep in mind that the goal of this video is not to give you a step-by-step guide on how to build this project. I'm deliberately omitting some of the details so that you can fill in the blanks, and hopefully learn a lot in the process as you problem solve and figure things out. So let me tell you about the project that I cooked up for you that I think will really help you learn AWS and give you something impressive to put on your resume. Now, for this project, there's going to be 6 core AWS services that you're going to be using to build out your project. For compute, you're going to be using Amazon EC2 or Elastic Compute Cloud. For a database, you'll be using Amazon Relational Database Service or RDS. For image storage, we're going to be using Amazon Simple Storage Service or S3. To manage permissions, we'll be using AWS Identity and Access Management or IAM. For networking configuration, we'll be using Amazon Virtual Private Cloud or VPC. And finally, to monitor our application, we'll be using Amazon CloudWatch. These 6 services are what I consider to be the bread and butter of AWS. No matter what career you're pursuing in the AWS cloud, you're going to be using these 6 services in some capacity throughout your career. So it's really important to build hands-on experience using these 6 core services. Now, the idea here is to use all of these services to build a web scraper. For those of you that don't know, a web scraper is a tool used to extract information from publicly available websites. This can be used in a ton of different contexts, like collecting store locations, checking for in-stock items at a retailer, or aggregating job postings. Now for my project, I'm going to be showing you how you might scrape the real estate website Zillow for home sale information. I'm doing this because I'm currently looking to purchase a home right now, and this information is actually useful for me. But what's useful for me may not be useful for you. So I invite you, in fact, I encourage you to customize this project for something that's important to you. If you're a parent, build a scraper to collect information about extracurricular activities. If you're looking for a new doctor, build an aggregator for all the doctors within 10 kilometers of your home. If you're a gamer, build an app to automatically check for video cards that are in stock at popular retailers. The possibilities here are endless, but what's important is that you build something that piques your curiosity and is helpful for your life. Now, in terms of our projects, there's a couple different steps that we need to run through. Our first step is going to be focused on functionality. So in terms of our AWS account, the first piece of infrastructure we're going to want to deploy is our EC2 instance. This is going to allow us to deploy code onto it so that we can start scraping our favorite website. Now, once you have your EC2 instance set up and running, the next thing you're going to want to do is write some code that allows you to scrape your website. In my case, I'll be using Zillow to try and collect home sale information in an area of my choosing within a particular price range. Now, there's many different ways to scrape websites. I definitely suggest using a pre-built library such as Puppeteer in order to accomplish this. These types of libraries make it really simple to scrape website information at scale and provide a whole bunch of useful features that'll just simplify your life. Another popular one that you can use is one called Beautiful Soup that I have some extensive experience with, and I would recommend that one as well. But Puppeteer seems to be a lot more popular and more modern, so I'd suggest to go with that in your project. Now, once you write your code and deploy it on your EC2 and you're starting to scrape some information, you need some place to store that information. For that, we'll be using Amazon RDS or Relational Database Service. So the next step for this project is to save the corresponding metadata information into your RDS instance. In my case, it'll include information like the home ID, the address, the sale information, etc., etc. Now, when you scrape websites, there may be some other information that isn't necessarily text-based and won't fit into a database. In my case, it may be images from the home listing that I may want to store and look at later. So for that, I'll be using Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3. And what I'll do in my case is save assets, or the image files for each of the home listings, into S3 so I can look them up later. This is the core functionality of our application, but there's a lot of work to do with the other 3 services to get this all up and running. Our next step is going to be focused on enabling this application, and we're going to do this by setting up permissions. Now to do this, you'll be using AWS IAM, or Identity and Access Management. So to get all of this to work, your EC2 instance is going to need permissions to 2 different services. First of all, it's going to need permissions to write data into your relational database service. You may also want to add query permissions in case you want to look up this data later as well. Second, you're going to need write permissions into your S3 bucket so that you can save image assets into it during scraping. Those are the only 2 permissions that you should need to set up with this project. Next, we'll move on to connectivity. For connectivity, you're going to be using the service Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC. This service allows you to create a virtual network in the AWS cloud that you and only you will have access to. It's isolated from other AWS customers, so no one from the public internet will be able to access your resources. Now for our case, we need to set up connectivity between our EC2 instance and our RDS database. For this, we're going to set up our EC2 instance in a public subnet and then place our RDS instance in a private subnet. Placing a database into a private subnet is a best practice in AWS. You always want to keep your data private, and putting it in a private subnet where it does not have internet access is the best way to do so. Placing the EC2 instance in a public subnet simply means that your instance is going to have direct access to the public internet via an internet gateway. Next, you're going to want to set up monitoring. Monitoring helps us ensure that our application is working correctly at all times and proactively notify us if things are working incorrectly. For this, we'll be using Amazon CloudWatch. 2 simple things you may want to do with CloudWatch are to set up logs and alarms on your EC2 instance. Logs by default are going to be stored on the EC2 instance itself, but you can install a CloudWatch agent to persist the logs collected on your instance into the CloudWatch service. This will make it so that you can keep those logs around much longer than normally possible, and you can also query them very easily within the AWS console. Adding alarms is another really important thing to do when it comes to maintaining the health of your system. You may want to add alarms on things like CPU usage, memory usage, disk space, things like this. You can also add alarms on your RDS instance if you'd like, and there's a whole bunch of other metrics that you can explore in the CloudWatch console that may be a good candidate for alarms. Another thing that's really important to do that you can create in CloudWatch is something called a dashboard. In our case, a system dashboard. A system dashboard is a collection of graphs and widgets that allow us to understand what is currently happening in our system. It allows us to explore data that's important to our application. In our case, it may be the number of concurrent scrapings that are ongoing, the number of times we're writing information into our RDS database, the number of images that we're storing in S3, so on and so forth. There's also system health metrics such as CPU usage, memory, disk space, the things I mentioned that you should put alarms on. Having all this information available to you at a glance using a system dashboard will make it really easy to understand what is going on with your system without having to fumble through different metric sections of the console when things are breaking. Having a readily accessible and useful system dashboard is a really important thing to have in any production system. So after all is said and done, this is what your project should look like. I've created a whole bunch of tutorial videos on many of the topics discussed in this video, and I'll leave links to them down below in the comments and description section.